We often feel an invisible pull toward who we used to be, toward habits, identities, and emotional reactions that no longer reflect our inner life. Carl Jung spent decades studying this psychological tension, the quiet struggle between our outdated selves and the self that wants to emerge. In this episode, we explore why letting go feels threatening, how the past becomes a psychological anchor, and how understanding Jung's insights can help us step into a truer, more grounded version of ourselves. There are moments in life when a quiet realization settles in the body. You have grown, and yet your life has not grown with you. The gap between who you've become and who you still pretend to be becomes impossible to ignore. You feel it when you return to familiar places and notice that you no longer fit the emotional architecture that shaped you. You feel it when someone from your past speaks to you as if you were still the person you were 10 years ago, and for a moment, you almost shrink back into that shape. Today we begin with this simple truth. People change, but our identities often lag behind. Carl Jung understood this psychological tension intimately. He spent his life exploring the layers of the human psyche, tracing the ways we cling to outdated stories to protect ourselves from the unknown. Jung believed that identity is not a fixed structure, but a living process, a negotiation between the self we show the world and the deeper inner self that rarely gets a voice. As he famously wrote, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." And acceptance begins with recognizing that we are not meant to remain the same person forever. So, as we begin this episode, think of the old versions of yourself that linger at the edges of your life. They hover in memories, in old relationships, in voices from the past that still echo inside you. Some protected you, some constrained you, some helped you survive moments you didn't have the words to describe, but none of them were designed to lead you forever. Today we explore why we hold them so tightly and what it means to finally loosen our grip. Clinging to an outdated identity isn't a flaw, it's a universal human pattern. We hold on to who we used to be because identity acts like a compass. Even when it's inaccurate, even when it leads us in circles, it gives us a sense of direction. Familiarity feels like safety, and in a world filled with uncertainty, safety becomes its own currency. But in modern life, this attachment intensifies. Technology freezes us in time. Social media archives our past selves with ruthless precision, creating a museum of who we were at every stage. We can scroll back and see our old beliefs, old aesthetics, old expressions of self, and in doing so, we unconsciously reinforce those identities. We curate a past, and that past in turn begins to shape us. It becomes harder to allow ourselves to grow when growth threatens the continuity we've built so publicly. Family and culture add another layer. They hand us roles early in life, the responsible one, or the shy one, the gifted one, the difficult one, and those roles calcify over time. Even as adults, we may feel obligated to perform the version of ourselves that others recognize, because stepping out of that role risks disappointing someone, and disappointment often feels more dangerous than staying small. We cling to old selves because change requires loss, the loss of certainty, of recognition, of belonging. Even when the old identity hurts us, it offers the comfort of predictability. So we keep returning to it, not because it fits, but because we don't yet trust who we are becoming. The tension grows quietly, a push from within, a pull from the past, and a life caught in the middle. To Jung, this struggle wasn't merely emotional, it was archetypal. He believed every human being lives at the intersection of two psychological forces, the ego, which seeks continuity and protection, and the deeper self, which seeks growth, authenticity, and wholeness. When we cling to old versions of ourselves, the ego is at work. It fears disruption. It fears the unknown. It believes survival depends on sameness. Jung saw outdated identities as psychological shell structures that form around us during moments of vulnerability or transition. They once served a crucial purpose, but eventually become restrictive. The problem, he believed, is that we learn to mistake these shells for the entirety of who we are. The moment we identify with them too strongly, they begin to limit our capacity to grow. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This wasn't just a statement about hidden beliefs, it was a warning about the dangers of unconscious identity. When we don't understand why we return to old roles or repeat old emotional patterns, we assume it's destiny. But Jung argued that it's simply unexamined psychology. His insight was that the unconscious clings to the familiar not out of stubbornness, but out of protection. If the past kept us safe emotionally, socially, or even physically, the psyche records that safety and tries to preserve it. But as we grow, the strategies that once protected us can begin to suffocate us. The ego resists the transformation that the self longs for. To Jung, real change becomes possible only when we see this dynamic clearly and begin to listen to the deeper voice within us, the one that seeks truth over comfort. When we bring Jung's insights into everyday life, they explain many of the emotional puzzles we encounter. Consider the moments when you react in a way that feels strangely outdated, like getting defensive during a conversation that doesn't actually threaten you, or feeling invisible in a room even though no one is dismissing you. These reactions often belong to an older version of you, one shaped in environments that required vigilance or performance. The present moment becomes entangled with the past, and you respond not with who you are now, but with who you once had to be. Think of visiting your childhood home. Even as an adult, old dynamics slip back into place. You may feel smaller, quieter, more cautious, or more rebellious. This isn't regression, it's an echo. An identity formed in that environment still lives inside you, waiting to be activated by familiar cues. Or consider relationships. A former partner reaches out, and suddenly you feel emotional patterns you thought you left behind. Not because you still love them or because you want to return, but because part of you remembers who you were in that chapter. Emotional habits endure even when the relationship doesn't. Jung's framework encourages us to pause in these moments instead of reacting automatically. By noticing the emotional pull from the past, we create space to choose differently. We can ask, whose voice am I speaking with? Whose fear am I feeling? Which version of me is being activated right now? This awareness is not about rejecting the old self, but about reclaiming authorship. We begin to respond from the person we've grown into rather than the person we used to be. When this awareness deepens, something shifts inside. The old versions of yourself begin to feel less like anchors and more like artifacts, meaningful, but no longer directive. The fear of letting go loses its intensity because you realize you're not abandoning your past. You're integrating it. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires a reconciliation between who we were and who we are becoming. It's not a rejection of the past, but a repositioning of it. This is where emotional transformation begins. Instead of fighting change, you begin to welcome it. Instead of fearing inconsistency, you begin to see it as evidence of aliveness. The narrative you tell yourself shifts from "I must stay the same" to "I am allowed to evolve." And with that shift comes freedom. And with that shift, Jung expressed this beautifully when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This isn't a destination, it's a process of uncovering, layer by layer, the parts of yourself that were overshadowed by old roles and expectations. The turning point arrives when you realize that the old identity was never meant to contain your entire life. It was simply the chapter that carried you to this moment. In this phase, people often describe feeling lighter, not because their circumstances changed, but because their inner allegiance shifted. They stop defending the old self and begin nurturing the new one. They stop seeking permission to grow and start allowing growth to happen naturally. The past loses its authority and the future becomes something gently possible. Integration is not dramatic. It unfolds in small, quiet choices. You begin to notice when you're shrinking into old patterns and gently redirect yourself. You interrupt the inner voice that speaks from outdated fears. You recognize that the beliefs that governed you at one stage were responses to that stage, not universal truths. Jung believed that integration requires compassion for every version of ourselves we once inhabited. Instead of resenting who you used to be, you begin to understand why you needed that identity. You see the strength it took to survive with the tools you had, and this compassion dissolves the shame that often keeps people trapped in the past. You might find yourself making different decisions. You express boundaries that once felt dangerous. You speak truths that once felt too heavy. You allow yourself to desire things your old identity would have dismissed. This is not reinvention, it is alignment. You're no longer living reactively from an unconscious past. You're choosing consciously from the present. Integration also means accepting that growth is cyclical. You will outgrow yourself many times. Each cycle brings its own discomfort, its own shedding, its own emergence. But instead of resisting these transitions, you begin to trust them. You realize that identity is meant to breathe, to expand, to reshape as you encounter new experiences. And in this trust, life begins to feel less like a performance and more like a conversation with yourself. At the heart of all of this lies a simple truth. We cling to old versions of ourselves because they protected us. They held the weight of our fears. They navigated our earliest challenges. They helped us survive environments we didn't yet understand. But once we recognize their role with clarity and compassion, we are no longer bound by them. Jung understood that selfhood is both fragile and resilient, that we are shaped by our histories but not defined by them. Growth demands that we honor the past without surrendering to it. As he wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This is not a call to erase the past, it is an invitation to step beyond it. Returning to our opening question, why do we cling? The answer becomes clearer now. We cling because we long for safety, for belonging, for continuity. But the moment we become conscious of this longing, it transforms. It no longer anchors us, it guides us. The longing shifts from a pull backward to a pull inward toward a deeper knowing, a more authentic presence. As we conclude, remember this: you are allowed to outgrow the stories you once used for shelter. You're allowed to become someone your past self could not yet imagine. And you're allowed to release identities that no longer honor your becoming. So as you move through your own unfolding, treat the old versions of yourself with gentleness. They carried the weight you could not name. They protected you in moments when you felt small, overwhelmed, or uncertain. They kept you alive long enough to grow beyond them. But they don't need to lead your life anymore. You can thank them, honor them, and let them rest. Your future self is not waiting on the other side of some dramatic breakthrough. It's emerging slowly in the choices you make, in the truths you finally speak, in the moments when you listen inward instead of collapsing into familiar patterns. Growth is not an event, it's an ongoing permission slip you give yourself. If you feel the pull of the past, remember that it is only a reminder of where you've been, not a command to return there. You can step forward without betraying your history. You can expand without abandoning your roots. You can evolve without needing to justify your becoming. And so, as we close, let this be a gentle affirmation. You are not required to remain loyal to the smallest version of yourself. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe for more videos like this.